get through this.
Easy for listening. I wasn't able to do it.
Easy for dancing. I'm not a great lover of cats.
That's my fear.
You're a disgrace, you are.
Not me.
That's my fear.
You're a disgrace, you are.
Hello and welcome to Shadowboxing. Today my guest is Robin Chappell. He is a Green politician and he is member for the mining and pastoral area.
That's correct.
Welcome, Robin.
Thank you for having me.
Robin, first of all, probably you are the most colourful person in the state parliament of Western Australia. Tell me something about your background.
My youth was interesting. I was in the swinging 60s in London, hanging around Soho in the 60s,
Yes.
going to the various clubs and doing lots of exciting things. I was a very, very conservative person, fighting hard against the then Labour government. And as life evolved, I've found that I've moved through a sea change, becoming much more socially aware. So then I came to Australia in 1973 and went and worked on remote Aboriginal communities. Then went back to another trade which I'd developed, which was sort of engineering, and went back and worked with the mining industry. And I started getting quite a bit of a passion for some of the remote areas, both in Indigenous heritage and indeed the environment.
So what catch your eyes in the remote area?
It was my curiosity. I'm not a particularly heavy drinker, and so on my day off I used to go wandering and walking around the bush, and I've trekked quite a long way through the Pilbara and Kimberley in my younger days when I was sort of 30, 40. And you suddenly become aware that there's an incredible amount of heritage and value
It's all
out
around,
there.
you know.
Thousands of carvings at remote locations, which still are not known to people today. And so I think it was that passion for the Indigenous culture and indeed the environment.
Tell me about your electorate. I heard that it's the biggest in the world in size.
It's 2.24 million square kilometres.
How many people lives on that?
About 75,000. Haven't got the latest census figures out yet, but about 75,000.
But I believe big size makes it important for several reasons.
Look, for a lot of reasons. One, that it was originally established because of the pastoral industry, which moved out from Perth into the regions to farm sheep and cattle. And then obviously after the 70s, the burgeoning iron ore industry, oil and gas all started. So it currently generates about a third of the nation's GDP coming out of that one region, associated with the mineral sector.
How many people represents on and how many level of that land?
Okay, we have in State Parliament in the Upper House,
Yes.
6 members of Parliament represent that area. There are currently 2 Liberal, 2 Labor, 1 National, 1 Green.
How can this happen? So how can you guys, 6 of you, can agree on representation of the same 75?
Oh, we don't. Oh, we
That's good.
definitely don't.
That's good. So
But you see, the idea of representation is that we represent individual sections of the community.
Yes.
So from that you can say that the Nationals represent 1/6, Liberals represent 2/6 or 1/3, Labor represents 1/3, and I represent 1/6. So that's the idea of proportional representation.
pastoral area is very important.
Yep.
So how much from that huge landmass is took up the pastoral activity?
Look, basically the whole of the landmass is, with the exception of some of the areas in the real desert areas, is taken up by the pastoral industry.
And how much is the economic importance that the pastoral activity?
Well, certainly in the north, it does have a very, very good economic outcome. Obviously, we're concerned about animal exports.
Live animal exports.
We are seeing an increase in people wanting to use abattoirs. And we have to remember that in the early days, up in the Kimberley, there were a number of major abattoirs working.
And what's happened?
Well, it became more economic, simpler to just truck the cattle offshore
travel,
and take out that aspect. We'd certainly like to see more abattoirs
Because
going
it's the
back
jobs.
in. It's jobs. It keeps the animals in a safer condition, and it means that there's a regional economy. We used to employ, interesting enough, in the early abattoirs up in Wyndham, Derby, and other places, a lot of indigenous people. So they were actually good indigenous employment.
On that note, how do you see the change of life of indigenous people and the culture since the 70s?
I think it's different.
Different.
To actually say whether it is better or worse, it's difficult to quantify that. And I say that because along came native title. Now, native title, interesting enough, whilst it gives indigenous people rights to country again, which was their country in the first place, they have to now go through a legal process to get their country back, only to be allowed to resell it again or have it taken away by the current government. Now, unfortunately, what native title has also done has divided communities.
And it still divides communities.
Oh, absolutely.
And Colin Barnett is using that tactic, and he, according to the sources, even blackmailing the communities and saying, if you're not doing it, you're ending up with worse. So the native
Look, I don't think he, by his nature, is doing that. I think it's the process. If you are an indigenous person and you have native title rights to a piece of land, and you get that land granted to you, currently the process is that if I'm a miner or a developer and I come to you and sort of say, well, I want to develop a mine on your land, you've got two options. Either you say no, and I do it anyway, because there's nothing.
There's the my way or the highway.
Or you say yes, and we negotiate a fiscal outcome. At the end of the day, you still can't protect your country. And I don't think it's Mr. Barnett or the former Labor government or anybody who drives that agenda.
So what is
directly.
that?
But it's the nuance of how native title works in Western Australia. It doesn't.
Because of the creation, the process when they created, or the legalities?
The legal issues.
The legal
it
issues.
does not provide protection. If you're in the Northern Territory...
So what is that for, then? If it's not provide protection for the people who needs it, so why do we using that? Why don't we change it? Or what?
We would love to, and certainly my colleague Rachel Seward has got amendments to the Native Title Act.
And what's the chance, you think, to change it?
Not really, because industry benefits out of it, government benefits out of a process.
So everyone is happy except the people who need the native title.
Right. In the Northern Territory, it's different, because the Northern Territory had a Land Rights Act. So in the Northern Territory...
It's happened before native title.
That's right.
Okay.
So what actually enables the native title people or native title claimants in the Territory is if they say no, it is a no. And until they actually change their mind, you can't do anything about it. Here, as I say, it's very much a gun to your head.
What's your view on democracy? Have we got democracy, or we lost democracy?
I think democracy, to a large degree, alters over time. True democracy is where the people remain in charge of the overall decision making. Quite clearly, as populations get larger, we release more of our responsibility and power to people like me. And we form governments. And we supposedly represent the interests of the people. But there are many competing interests. And unfortunately, one of the things that we face in those many competing interests are the interests of individuals who find themselves in a position of power, either wealth or in terms of what they can bring to government in terms of an income. And that tends to taint the notion of democracy. I think the system that we have, the Westminster system that operates in England, here in Australia and New Zealand is a relatively robust system. It does have its checks and its balances. But over time, it has become modified. It is less rigorous a system today than it used to be. Having said that, there are many systems in the world that are completely undemocratic. And so I think that we need to certainly have a look globally at how we can ensure that the truth of democracy is retained.
But we're losing our rights, our civil rights, day by day. So how can we have democracy in a society when happens parallel? I couldn't understand
I would agree
myself.
with you. What we found in the last term of government is many new regulations being brought into place which control what you and I can or cannot do. At the same time, we're finding the regulatory regime that exists for the mining industry and for the interests being removed.
And they do whatever they like.
But I would still prefer our process than the process that exists in many places in the world.
They still need to be changed. Something needs to be done.
Look, I think so. But I think that eventually society, and maybe I'm old enough, goes around in circles. And we see people become ambivalent, less interested in democracy, until a point where suddenly they realize that they're losing their democracy.
Robin, we're coming back after the break, so don't go away. We're coming back after the break with more discussions on shadowboxing.